too bad. I think I'm the kind of token politician in this particular scenario. So what I'm going to do is try and weaving in some of the points that have been made so far, because I don't need to repeat what's been said already. And I've got 6 kind of, if you talk about what are the levers that you need to pull, that's what I'm trying to address as well. They're not on the slides, but they're going to come out of my mouth. So that's who I am, cabinet member. It wasn't 1492 that I actually started, but leave that aside. I may look it, but that's not the point. My first point actually relates to this, and this is the first message. It is not a kind of you can't replicate what Enfield does everywhere as Enfield does it. You can't replicate what Manchester does as Manchester do it. You have to know your local economy, you have to know your local area. It has to fit. First message. And the reason for that is that just a little bit of understanding about some of the things that are driving us in our local authority. It is a fairly industrialised area, it's unique, and I think as Carol's said, or Cllr has said in the past, actually it's more like a northern town than a London borough. It's because we've got a whacking great chunk of industrial activity, and we had a massive amount of industry in the area, and still do. It all went downhill once all those manufacturing businesses went out. And the demography is substantially changed, you with me, over the time. So there are certain pressures. So when we're talking about what are we after in terms of our wider goals around jobs, wealth and sustainability, and I'm not going to repeat the Manchester stuff, we're doing very similar kinds of things, is that we've got very significant numbers of working poor, we've got very significant numbers of underemployment because the sectors that do exist are on casualised labour and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that's greatly different to Manchester. Enfield is 220,000 people. We were talking yesterday in our strategic partnership. It's a big London borough. If you split it into 2 halves, which it is, it's a tale of 2 halves. Yesterday we were saying is that the eastern half will probably be the poorest ward in the whole of London. And that gives you some idea of what we're actually dealing with. So you get these drivers about what are we after, but also want to raise the income levels of a number of people who are working in the area. So you begin to see what are the kind of overriding issues that you're trying to deal with in terms of actually not just the gas retrofit or all of the particular kind of strategy. So understand the context, understand what your jobs goals are, understand what your wealth is, which is trying to capture it, and the sustainability argument, I think, fits like fuel poverty, which is mentioned. Don't need to go back over to those. The second point I want to make, which addresses some of the points that I think have been made, where is the political will? Now you've got 2 authorities actually that wouldn't necessarily vie for first purpose, but we know Manchester's political will, we know your leader in the sense in terms of what we're talking about. Enfield has a political will to do something. You need to, wherever you're coming from, if you haven't got that political will amongst your cabinet members and politicians, then you really are working on an uphill struggle. For all of the things that have been heard in all of the presentations here this morning. And how does that political will express itself in Enfield? You heard first of all from Alan about new directions. The political will is expressed in that. It's a kind of side-on initiative of the directors and the cabinet members pushing along with Alan and a few others particular sets of directions in which we want to see changes. There's a political will to see that happen. The political will also is expressing itself now in some work that Policy Committee is doing on 3 strands of work which go alongside it. We're working forward about the next 4 or 5 years. Yes, you've got your Director of Housing, yes, you've got your Director, and you've got your Cabinet members. But actually, if you don't start trying to collectively draw together the political will of your senior staff, and by that I mean Cabinet members, your councillors, and of your directors in an area, and get them behind what we're talking about, thinking about the procurement discussion, then it's not going to happen. We also have, which a lot of places don't, and I am really quite committed to it, the Enfield Strategic Partnership, those things that existed. I don't know if Manchester still has it, but you've got essentially 11 Greater Manchester, so you've got other mechanisms. But we still retain it, as we had our conference yesterday, of all of the agencies and partners together. Political will, second point. So that's really crucial. Our strategy in broad terms, and I'm going to, in a sense, intersperse the gas bit here, is clearly we're going for key sectors. And by key sectors, we're actually looking at what sectors are very much rooted, going back to the original introduction here this morning, in terms of those sectors that can't escape from the borough, or that are unlikely to escape from the borough. Which is why, since we've got into not just the gas issues, but also the decentralised energy. All the waste of North London ends up in Edmonton, which is in Enfield. We've got the incinerator, it's a big decentralised energy network. We are going to set up the company in order to be able to do it. That can't escape, it's there, it's going to be there, you know, for donkey's years. So you build something around it in terms of the way in which it's going to be contributing to the local economy. In that particular way. Market gardening, I think, has been said, and a few others. We can talk about that when we have lunch breaks. So we've got key sectors. We've also got logistics, and we've got others as well. But the key sectors is quite important in terms of working between all the various, whether it's the employers within those sectors, social enterprises, third sector, council, and others. It is clearly also about building supply chains. They are shot. Absolutely shot. I think that was said in the opening contributions. When you look at who delivers what and where the supply chain is, quite often it ends up abroad. It doesn't even start in there. You know, you go and talk to them and they say, well, where do you get your engineers from? Where do you get this? Where do you get that? Oh, Holland or Italy. It's not actually in the UK at all. It's not even in Manchester. It's just nowhere in terms of that. So we've got to try and rebuild this as a generality about trying to get this back in. The market gardening, as we talked about, where we looked at where is all the understanding about market gardening, where are the glass houses and all those built, the answer was Holland, Holland and Holland, right? End of argument. So in fact we've got no supply chain and therefore local. So we've got to build the whole thing almost from the bottom. And that really is one of the key issues around the British Gas Initiative. The British Gas Initiative does all of the retrofit points that have been made mention of. I don't need to repeat that. But what we're after, and I'm going to develop this point because I think it was in theirs and it's in ours as well, we're using it as a way of trying to ensure that we can build the supply chain of those that can actually undertake the work. The supply chain is actually where an awful lot of the money is as well. You look at like the Portsmouth issue at the moment. £100 of the Portsmouth, £66 was in the supply chain. That's what Portsmouth is worried about. It's not just £100 in the jobs that go, it's the 66 that goes with it in the supply chain. So the supply chain is crucial. So you start working with developing the supply chain, developing the accreditation of those companies able to undertake that particular work. You do that in conjunction with your colleges and FE, and then you start building up that supply chain and those companies that are actually able to undertake the work at the accredited level. And then bingo, because we're working on also working with the construction sector, because we have a construction sector group. We haven't talked today about 106, if you know what 106 is, and planning gain and all those things. That's where local authorities can put a lot of pressure on companies. Last discussion was, if you're in a new build and you're doing major new building, are the companies that are being trained and developed under the retrofit gas scheme also then able to actually be in the supply chain for new build? Because they've got the qualification. Answer, they said yes, very obvious. So what you've got is a kind of like, you begin to see the joining up of actually what we're talking about. That's my kind of next point, my third point in terms of the message, is that wherever you go into this, you've got to ensure, or somebody's got to ensure, that things start to get joined up. If you don't start joining up your sectors, your supply chains, your training, and all the rest of it, you don't deliver the local gain. Joining up in a locality is important. And because of the way in which we've got so seduced by the notion of the free market over the last 20 to 30 years, it's splintered out all over the place. And I'm involved in the European programme, know about one, and you actually look at the German ones, we've been there recently, and the French and all the rest of it, they just automatically say, well, it's obvious, isn't it? You have a kind of more kind of regional approach, the way in which you have higher education and the colleges and the schools working towards it with the businesses and all, etc. It's fairly obvious. And they look at us, and we look at them, and because obviously the culture in this country is totally different. Procurement policy links to this. I won't go over that, but we also have the very similar kind of approach in procurement policy, because obviously the way in which procurement is happening through just not that gas retrofit, but all the other things, is actually going to develop that as well. So it is about, therefore, in the supply chain, taking an active view, which is the next message, in terms of actually enabling the supply chains here to be developed, for the businesses to be developed, and for the people to be trained who are locally unemployed or actually not getting enough out of it. And that's quite key from the point of view of getting a joined up approach. So, my final point, quick in terms of 15 minutes, but bringing business into the locality, wherever your starting point is, whether for us it was CSR, try and read the story. For us, we started with CSR, we ended up with British Gas, you end up again going into supply chains and local employment and the colleges, and you're going round. But you can start another point. You can start at a sustainability policy because you've got to do it. We could have started there, and you go round it a different way. But everything, when you go round the story, is that you have to make it work, is to join it up. So wherever your starting point is, make sure all the components are actually in that bigger strategy. Those councils that I think have thought that way and are thinking that way are more likely to succeed in actually doing something about the local economy. If it still stays fragmented, then it doesn't work. So no matter where you start, just remember you've got the same kind of story to actually tell. And then I think there's a kind of crucial component in this, which is my last kind of point. You've got to find where the drivers and the brokers are in this. If you can have a joined up story, people have to keep telling the story, could be me, or in a sense are the brokers in joining it up. Whether it's the director, right? They go around and they join it all up and they broker it and they make it happen. If they're not there, if you're not part of that network or that brokering, then that story doesn't get told and that joining up doesn't get told. And just to come back on one little thing, which was just a bit, when he said, it was under procurement, not wishing to knock somebody down, but actually when he said there's no neighbourhood money, European structural funds have just put it back in. Therefore, who's doing your European structural funds? You can now, in the social innovation clauses of the European Union, for the structural funds, and in the EU funding as well, designation of areas of 50 and 100,000 people, going back to the model that was there 10 years ago. So it's not totally off the agenda. And in fact, if you go into the European stuff, it's come back on in social innovation of that relationship. So there is opportunities, but then you need, again, a broker, a storyteller to help to join up the story. Thank you.